You don't need to savor a seat. My aunt snapped her voice, slicing through the hotel ballroom like a knife. She doesn't belong at our table. I stood just inside the grand doors of the Hilton Banquet Hall, gripping my clutch like a lifeline. I stood up and walked out, or at least I almost did. It wasn't always like this. I used to believe one day they'd see me, that if I worked hard enough, kept quiet, stayed humble, maybe I'd finally be invited to sit beside them instead of behind them. I spent years trying to be invisible enough to avoid their ridicule, yet visible enough to be acknowledged, never sure which one hurt less. My name is Amelia Lennox, and this is the story of how the girl they laughed at became the name on the building they no longer have access to. Back then, I was the family dropout, coffee girl my cousin Leah used to sneer. At 22, I was working 3 jobs and still sleeping in my car on and off. I remember one Thanksgiving I brought a pumpkin pie I made from cafe leftovers. The dessert table was full, they said. My Aunt Vivian didn't even glance at me, and my mom. She just stared into her wine glass. I kept wondering, what did I ever do wrong? When I was 12, Grandpa looked me in the eye and said, "You're too sensitive to last in this family." I believed him. After that, I started hiding my report cards. My wins. Even when I built my first app at 16, I told no one. Why would I? They would have laughed, claimed it wasn't mine. But there was one person who saw me, Mrs. Thompson, my high school business teacher. During lunch one day, she told me, "Amelia, you think your power is in being quiet, but it's in knowing when to stop apologizing." At the time, I didn't understand. I thought power came from being accepted, from being allowed in. Years later, I learned the truth. Power isn't given. It's built quietly, painfully, and brick by brick until it's too loud for anyone to ignore. The turning point came one winter night when I was 19 closing shift at a downtown cafe. A customer left behind a tech magazine. The cover read, "How this 23-year-old built a scheduling app that raised 3..." I devoured it. Not for the money, but because I saw myself someone who started with nothing and dared to build anyway. That night, I stayed up sketching a dream I had buried deep, a voice-activated scheduler powered by adaptive AI. I had no formal training, no capital, no Wi-Fi at home. I sat outside the laundromat at midnight stealing signal to upload my prototypes. To my family, I'd vanished. Aunt Vivian used to say I was off finding myself code for failure. I wasn't invited to Cousin Jacob's wedding. I found out my grandfather's cabin had been sold from someone's Instagram post. And when Grandma passed, no one told me until 2 weeks later because I didn't have the right morning energy. Still, I kept building. I launched the first version of my app under an alias because I was terrified they'd find it and mock me. But to my surprise, it gained traction. Slowly, then quickly. Within 18 months, I had my first investor, a quiet tech veteran from Detroit. My college friend Liam offered me his garage. Lennox Tech was born on a folding table beside a busted mini fridge and a box fan that barely worked. While they thought I'd disappeared, I was evolving. 4 years passed, and the day I walked into that Hilton ballroom was the day I decided to stop hiding. They didn't know I was the one who'd acquired Delman Enterprises, the family's crown jewel. The company Uncle Ron bragged about like it was his own child. In truth, it was sinking. And I bought it quietly, legally, and mercilessly. I didn't expect them to welcome me. But I also didn't expect the first words out of my aunt's mouth to be, "She doesn't belong at our table." The first camera flash went off seconds later, reporters shouting my name. The room froze. I turned locked eyes with Vivian, her champagne flute trembling. Then Kendra Fielding, the no-nonsense anchor from City Ledger News, stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, meet Amelia Lennox, CEO of Lennox Tech, and as of this morning, the new majority stakeholder in Delman Enterprises." I walked forward, not as their niece, but as the woman they could no longer ignore. I didn't sit down right away. I wanted the silence to stretch a little longer. Let them squirm. Let them feel the shift in gravity. For once, I wasn't chasing a seat, I was choosing whether I even wanted to stay in the room. But I did. Not for them. For me. I walked to the front table, the table they claimed I didn't belong at. Aunt Vivian stared straight ahead, like if she ignored me hard enough, I'd vanish again. My mother sat beside her, fiddling with her empty wine glass, her eyes refusing to meet mine. I pulled out the very chair they tried to protect, slowly, deliberately. "I'd say thank you for saving me a seat," I said calmly, just loud enough for them to hear. But I see it was already mine to begin with. The camera flashes started again, this time slower, intentional, like the quiet before lightning hits. A few seats down, my cousin Leah finally found her voice. You're the one who bought out Delman. That's Grandpa's company." I met her gaze. It was. Vivian's face twitched. She blinked rapidly, trying to process. Her daughter, the one who dropped out, the one working at a coffee shop. "That was 4 years ago," I said, swirling the water glass in front of me. "While you were planning this reunion, I was closing a 9-figure deal. Someone at the table dropped their fork. I didn't flinch. That's when Uncle Ronald spoke, his voice thick with disbelief and ego. "This is just a stunt," he growled. "You don't belong in this industry. You never went to Wharton like the rest of us. You were a dropout with a website." I smiled. "You're right. I never went to Wharton. But last year I hired 2 of your classmates. They work in my New York office. Want me to say hi for you?" His face turned dark red. I wasn't done. For years I was told I wasn't good enough, not smart enough, not a real Lennox, and I believed it. Until I realized my strength wasn't in fitting in. It was in walking away. The room shifted. People weren't eating anymore. They were listening. "You laughed when I failed," I said, louder eyes scanning their stunned faces. "You said I was chasing nothing, that I embarrassed this family, that no one would ever take me seriously." I stood up slowly, glass still in hand. "But today you're sitting at my table, and whether you like it or not, this family has a new head now." I raised the glass, to starting over. At first nothing, then a few clinks, tentative, awkward. Even some of the cousins who used to mock me followed suit. Vivian. She didn't touch her glass. Her fingers clutched the stem like it was her last thread of control. That was when I knew. This wasn't just a reunion. This was a reckoning. The flashes faded, but the tension clung to the air like smog. My mother finally shifted in her seat. "Amelia, honey, maybe we should talk, just the 2 of us." I turned to her. "Sure, let's talk. I'd love to know why you stayed silent all those years while they humiliated me." She looked down. She didn't deny it, just folded her hands in her lap like the tablecloth had answers. I stood up again, pushed the chair back with quiet defiance. "Actually, let's talk now. All of us, since you've spent years whispering behind closed doors about how I didn't belong, since I wasn't invited to Jacob's wedding, since I learned about the cabin being sold through Instagram, since every one of you decided I was a failure." I paused, letting it sink in. Newsflash, I didn't disappear. I worked, I built. I became the woman you were too arrogant to imagine. And now the name Lennox doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to the woman you tried to erase. Uncle Ron scoffed. "So this is a power play." I leaned forward, both palms on the table, my voice calm, final. "No, this is justice." The silence that followed was heavier than anything anyone at that table had ever carried, and I intended to let them hold it, feel its full weight. Just then, someone tapped gently on my shoulder. I turned. Liam stood behind me, calm and composed in his navy suit, my head of public affairs, and my oldest ally. He leaned in and said quietly, "The governor's press team wants to schedule a follow-up for tomorrow morning. They said congratulations again," then softer. "They're calling this the comeback story of the decade." I gave a faint smile. "Tell them I'll call tonight and have their comms director send over a media kit. I want us ahead of this." He nodded and slipped away into the crowd. I turned back just in time to catch my aunt's glare. "You brought an entourage to a family reunion," she spat. I tilted my head. "You brought arrogance. At least my guest list serves a purpose." The whispers around the ballroom were growing, now distant cousins, family friends, old neighbors. Some looked confused, some looked intrigued, a few looked ashamed. I glanced back at the table. "Oh," I added casually, running my fingers along the edge of the tablecloth. "I forgot to mention I bought this hotel last month." They blinked, all of them. I wasn't going to say anything I said, calm as ever, but it seems some of you still don't recognize who I am, so let me spell it out. I raised a hand and motioned to the head waiter. He approached briskly. "Yes, Miss Lennox clear table 7 after dessert," I said coolly. "They're done here." Vivian's face lost all color. "You can't do that," she hissed. I straightened my shoulders. "I just did. They didn't move right away. But the servers did. Polished, professional, precise. It was happening." And slowly, one by one, my family stood, like children dismissed from class. Uncle Ronald grabbed his coat. Leah avoided my gaze. Cousins gathered their things in silence, not anger, confusion. Because people like them never imagine that the person they once stepped on might rise high enough to make them kneel. But I had. I wasn't the charity case anymore. I was the storm they never saw coming. I sat back down at the now half-empty table, poised and unbothered. Kendra Fielding passed behind me on her way out, raising her phone in a quiet toast. "That was gold, Amelia. Pure gold. The public's gonna eat this up." I didn't smile, because this wasn't about headlines. This was about healing, and I hadn't even started. I didn't rush to leave the ballroom. I wanted to linger. I wanted them to see that I stayed, that I now belonged in the room they once tried to erase me from. I reached for the untouched dessert in front of me. The chocolate mousse was rich, delicate, something I once thought I'd never be allowed to taste. Funny how life works. I took one small bite. Just as Leah returned, she hovered at the side of the table, napkin twisted in her hand like a nervous tick. "I didn't know," she said softly. "I mean, no one told me you were doing all this. We thought you just moved away, that you disappeared." I looked her in the eye. "I had to disappear," I replied. "You all made sure there wasn't a place for me here." She lowered her gaze. "We were just kids. I didn't mean to be cruel." I set my fork down gently. "Cruelty doesn't care about age, Leah. You were old enough to laugh when they joked I'd end up barefoot behind a diner counter." She winced. "But I'm not here to settle every score." I said softer this time. "Then why are you here?" she asked honestly. I paused, thought about it, because I needed to see their faces when they realized the girl they threw away didn't vanish. She rebuilt herself. Leah nodded slowly. I deserved that. She walked off after that, quieter. No fake smiles, no closing jab, just silence. A different kind of silence. The kind that says, "I see you now." I didn't realize how much time had passed until I glanced at my watch. The ballroom was still half full, scattered with relatives murmuring among themselves. Some cast stolen glances at me, others tried to pretend I wasn't there, but I could feel it. Something had shifted. When I finally stepped into the hallway, the cool air hit my skin like a splash of clarity. Liam was waiting by the elevator, checking his phone, always a step ahead. "You okay?" he asked. I shrugged. It's strange. I thought I'd feel more triumphant. He nodded. Revenge doesn't always feel like fireworks. Sometimes it just feels quiet. Yeah. We walked to the elevator in silence. I reached out to press the call button, but then paused. "I want to stop by someone's house before we head out," I said suddenly. "Family." Not exactly. An hour later, we pulled up in front of a modest one-story house on Willow Avenue. The porch light flickered. I walked alone to the door. "Mrs.?" Thompson opened it before I could even knock. "Amelia," she gasped. "I hope it's not too late." "You're never too late," I said, stepping inside. Her house smelled like vanilla candles and warm paper, just like it did when I was 17. "I've been seeing the headlines," she said, closing the door behind me. but I didn't want to intrude. You were never an intrusion, I replied. She smiled misty-eyed. You told me once, I continued, that the best revenge is success, delivered with grace. I didn't understand it then, and now I do. She reached for my hand and squeezed it gently. You've come a long way, Amelia, but don't let the past anchor you. You have more to build than just proving them wrong. I nodded. I didn't go back to the hotel that night. I stayed on her couch, sipping warm tea. For the first time in years, I wasn't fighting to be seen. I just was. The next morning, my phone buzzed relentlessly on the nightstand. Emails, missed calls, texts. Liam had left 3 voicemails. I sat up, pulse quickening. Amelia, his voice said through the speaker, "Call me now?" Someone leaked a story. It's all over the morning broadcasts. I called back immediately. What kind of story? They're accusing you of manipulating the Delman acquisition. Pressure tactics, insider influence. They're trying to paint you as a corporate predator. I stood up, pacing the guest room floor. They weren't saying that last week when they begged me to buy them out quietly. They're desperate, Liam said. They lost. Now they're trying to make you look like the villain. I stopped mid-step. Who's behind it? He hesitated. Your cousin, Matthew. He's listed as a speaker in the press conference. He's siding with them. Silence. Matthew. I gave him a job. I gave him purpose when no one else would. My own blood, I whispered. The second my power shakes their comfort, they turn on me. I'm sorry, Liam said. We can't ignore this. The media's already moving. I looked out the window at the early morning light breaking over the trees. Then we hit back, I said. Hard. 3 hours later, I was back in the glass tower bearing my name, Lennox HQ. The elevator ride was quiet. The last time I stood here, I was celebrated. Today it felt like every screen was sharpening its knives. My legal team, PR, and CFO were already in the boardroom. Tension buzzed in the air. I sat at the head of the table, calm, cold. Let's get one thing straight, I began. This isn't about ethics, it's about ego. They can't handle that someone like me, someone they wrote off, outplayed them in the open. Vanessa. My head of communications nodded. We need a public counter-narrative. If we don't respond fast, it'll snowball. I tapped my fingers lightly on the table. Do we still have all the emails? Liam nodded. Everyone. The acquisition was clean, legal, documented. Every step signed, sealed, time-stamped. Good, I said. Then we go public. Today, Vanessa asked. No, I said, rising. We go now. By noon, I was standing in front of cameras again. But this time, it wasn't at a family reunion, it was on my own turf. Behind me, the Lennox Tech logo gleamed like armor. Some of you may have heard recent claims I said into the mic, allegations meant to discredit not only me, but the integrity of the company I've built from the ground up. I paused. I will not be bullied into silence. I did not rise by playing dirty. I rose by working harder than anyone who told me I didn't belong. I clicked the remote in my hand. Behind me on the screen, the emails began to appear. Signatures, meeting logs, bank approvals. They never expected someone like me to document everything I said. But I did, because I've spent my whole life being doubted, and I prepared for the day they'd try to twist my story. Another pause. My voice softened but sharpened. My only mistake was thinking blood equals loyalty. Gasps rippled. But now I know family doesn't always mean truth, and success doesn't require permission. And then I walked off stage. Let them drown in their lies. Back in my office, I finally exhaled. The press was buzzing. Investors were stabilizing. The legal team confirmed the documents on screen had already started going viral proof of every decision made in daylight. But before I could even reach for the next folder on my desk, the door opened. It was my mother. She hovered in the doorway holding her purse like it was a shield. Her voice was soft. "Can I come in?" I said nothing at first, then nodded once. She walked across the room like she was stepping on glass. She sat down slowly across from me, folded her hands neatly in her lap. "I watched your speech," she said. You were powerful. I waited. She took a shaky breath. I should have stood up for you back then, when they mocked you, when they erased you right in front of me. I was scared. I let them shape how I treated my own daughter. The silence stretched between us. I kept hoping you'd come back one day. She added, voice barely above a whisper, on your knees, asking for forgiveness. But I never imagined you'd come back like this. I leaned forward, my voice steady but low. I didn't come back to impress you, Mom. I came back to bury what you all tried to kill in me. Her eyes filled with tears. She nodded slowly. I know, and I deserve that. Maybe that was enough. Not closure, not forgiveness, but truth. That weekend, I returned to the town where it all began, not to hide, not to survive, but to reclaim. The community tech hub I'd been quietly funding for 2 years was finally ready. We were cutting the ribbon, no press, no headlines, just kids, girls who reminded me of myself, eager, bright-eyed, undervalued. I stepped onto the small platform. A crowd of families stood in the sun, clapping politely. Some of the young girls in the front row held laptops in their arms like trophies. This place is for the ones who were told they weren't good enough, I said into the mic. It's for anyone who was told their voice didn't matter. For the ones like me who started with nothing. A small girl, Holly, 11 years old, reached up and handed me a crayon drawing. It showed a woman in a red blazer standing on a mountain holding a flag that read, "Never quit." I blinked hard. That meant more than any boardroom ever had. Later that evening, I stopped at my grandfather's old house. The lawn was overgrown. The porch lights barely worked. It looked like memory and dust. Matthew was there. He looked up as I stepped from the car, clearly startled. "What are you doing here?" he asked stiffly. "Checking on what's left," I replied. "Of this house? Of you?" He crossed his arms. Defensive. "If you came to yell, don't bother. I already lost everything." I looked at him calm. "You didn't lose everything. You lost my trust." His jaw tightened. "I thought you'd ruin the family name." "No," I said quietly. "I built it into something real, something earned. There's a difference." We stood there in the silence. Autumn leaves scraped across the porch like whispers. Then I added, "You sold your name to the people who laughed at me. But if you ever want to build something real without hiding behind last names or titles, you know where to find me." I turned to leave, not because I wanted revenge, but because I no longer owed them my pain, only my silence. And silence, I've learned, echoes louder than rage. That night, back in my penthouse, I sat by the window with the city below me. My phone buzzed. A text from Liam Investors, are happy. Press is back in our favor. New partnership offer on the table. But none of it mattered right then, because in that still moment, I felt it. Peace. I wasn't waiting for their apology anymore. I wasn't chasing their approval. I had outgrown every insult, every slammed door, every table I was told I didn't belong at, because I had built my own, and it was unshakable. Part 6. Closing Reflection. In the weeks that followed, life moved forward, but something inside me had shifted permanently. I wasn't waking up with a knot in my stomach anymore. I wasn't obsessively checking my inbox for another family jab disguised as a concerned message. The space they once occupied in my mind had quieted, not vanished, just settled. One morning, I stood at the edge of the Lennox Tech rooftop, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the skyline. The glass tower I built reflected everything around it, but more than that, it reflected the girl I used to be, the girl who used to stare at buildings like this and wonder if she'd ever be allowed inside. Now her name was carved in steel at the entrance. It wasn't about revenge anymore. Not really, it was about reclamation. I'd spent so long trying to prove something to people who'd already decided I didn't count. But now I finally understood my worth never belonged to them in the first place. It had always been mine. They just refused to see it, and for too many years, I did too. Sometimes I still remember those small moments that cut the deepest being, left off. Family group texts ignored at reunions spoken about in the past tense, like I was someone who never quite turned out right. But those memories don't ache anymore. They remind me who I had to become to get here. And if I could speak to the girl, I used to be the one hiding outside laundromats with a cracked laptop and $14 in her bank account, I'd tell her, they will never save you a seat, but one day you'll own the table. That's the thing about family betrayals, they never warn you before they break you. But healing shows up quietly, in the strength you didn't know you were building, in the silence you once feared but now carry like armor. In the weeks that followed, life moved forward, but something inside me had shifted permanently. I wasn't waking up with a knot in my stomach anymore. I wasn't obsessively checking my inbox for another family jab disguised as a concerned message. The space they once occupied in my mind had quieted, not vanished, just settled. One morning, I stood at the edge of the Lennox Tech rooftop, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the skyline. The glass tower I built reflected everything around it, but more than that, it reflected the girl I used to be. The girl who used to stare at buildings like this and wonder if she'd ever be allowed inside. Now her name was carved in steel at the entrance. It wasn't about revenge anymore, not really. It was about reclamation. I'd spent so long trying to prove something to people who'd already decided I didn't count, but now I finally understood my worth never belonged to them in the first place. It had always been mine. They just refused to see it. And for too many years, I did too. Sometimes I still remember those small moments that cut the deepest being left off family group. Texts ignored at reunions, spoken about in the past tense like I was someone who never quite turned out right. But those memories don't ache anymore. They remind me who I had to become to get here. And if I could speak to the girl, I used to be the one hiding outside laundromats with a cracked laptop and $14 in her bank account, I'd tell her, they will never save you a seat, but one day you'll own the table. That's the thing about family betrayals, they never warn you before they break you. But healing shows up quietly, in the strength you didn't know you were building, in the silence you once feared but now carry like armor. Have you ever been pushed aside by your own family only to rise higher than they ever imagined? What would you do if you were in my shoes? Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story hit close to home, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. You're not alone, and you never were.